This is my review of Chris Eubank Jr. versus Conor Benn Face Off. In case you haven't seen this, it's one of those promotional face off programs that a lot of big fights tend to do these days. I remember HBO used to have their spot. I think that was called Face Off 2. Matchroom Boxing had theirs, which is usually called The Gloves Are Off. This one is actually on Matchroom Boxing's YouTube channel, so you can check it out if you haven't seen it already. It premiered, I think, a couple of hours ago. And yeah, I'm just going to talk about it and give you my thoughts. So this, to be honest, it was okay. It was an entertaining 20 and a half minutes, I'll say. It was really just a continuation of the press conference that these two had. And this program is filmed on the same day as the press conference for the announcement of this fight. You can see both Chris Eubank Jr. and Conor Benn wearing their the same clothes that they were wearing to the press conference. And it was weird. It was taking place in like this weird darkened room, like part library, part wine cellar, part church. It was a very strange backdrop. You can kind of see the stained glass windows behind Conor Benn. Behind Ade, you can see these things. They almost look like wine cases. Very strange. Behind Chris Eubank Jr., there's like a book cabinet. Very odd. And of course, Chris Eubank Jr. in this hideous jacket, whereas Conor Benn looking like a South American cholo. So, but what was said? Is there anything interesting or insightful? Not really. It was really just more of the same, as I say. A continuation of the press conference with Chris Eubank Jr. basically reiterating that he's not going to be 100% for this fight. It's going to be 60%, but that's all he needs to beat the smaller and less experienced Conor Benn. He also went into some details, saying how he typically abstains in the 8 weeks in the lead up to a big fight. But for Conor Benn, he's only going to abstain for a fortnight, for 2 weeks, because he doesn't have to. Yeah, some kind of contradictions from Chris Eubank Jr. because he's saying he's not going to really do his usual training camp, but then he says it's going to be harder to prepare for this fight because he has to get down to weight. And I understand it, but yeah, lacking the continuity here. And I think it really is by design. Chris Eubank Jr., he is probably very confident in this fight, and he's really just taking these opportunities to wind up Conor Benn. And Conor Benn, he's quite hot-headed, just like his dad. Definitely got that fighting spirit, that hot temper, and he's not really biting, to be fair. He looks kind of frustrated, but he doesn't look angered by Chris Eubank Jr. He doesn't look like his blood's boiling and he's filling up with rage. No, he just looks like it's very much a dynamic of Chris Eubank Jr. trying to be like an older brother, teasing his younger brother, and Conor Benn is like a more mature younger brother, so he doesn't really rise up to it and bite and take the bait. So yeah, it's none of it's particularly intelligent. As I say, it's not very insightful. It's just a bit of fun. You can't really look into what these guys say. And to be fair, if you're not one for trash talk, because I know there are a fair few people who they love professional boxing, they're hardcore fans, but they don't like trash talk. That's fair enough. Me personally, I like trash talk as long as it's done well. As long as the person is charismatic and they make me laugh. If I'm laughing, I'm laughing and I don't mind. But Chris Eubank Jr., I've always found his trash talk to be a little bit dry. I like, I have some reservations about Chris Eubank Jr. as a person, because I don't know him, obviously. As a fighter as well, he has his limitations. His trash talk is what it is, Sometimes he says some funny things, sometimes he doesn't. So it's hit or miss. Conor Benn, he isn't much of a trash talker. And I feel like this kind of programming here, when you see the two together, just like the press conference, you kind of get an indication of why people in the boxing public, especially the casual fans, they're going to maybe lean towards Conor Benn a little bit, because he comes across as this kind of working class, everyman kind of guy, always fights with his heart and soul and gives his all for the public and doesn't really show off much and that kind of stuff. Whereas with Chris Eubank Jr., he's very aloof. He has like this aura of superiority where he thinks and he knows that he's better than the average man, and that can turn people off. And so if you want to factor in the dynamic and the public perceptions of these two, this kind of show, it shows you that most people are probably going to be in favor of Conor Benn. However, that's public perception. The reality takes place in the ring, and that's what Chris Eubank Jr. especially talks about, because he says how Conor Benn has never been in this situation before. He has never, well, firstly, he's never fought this higher weight class, even though this is what, 157. Not actually a weight class, but it's way north. It's 10 pounds north of where Conor Benn has fought before. But also the occasion. And I think that's a good point, because Conor Benn, yeah, it's fair to say he's on a roll right now. He's been fighting a higher level of opposition to what he's used to and dealing with them in pretty spectacular fashion. But there's not really much, there hasn't been much pressure on him. And now don't get me wrong, there is pressure on every fighter. Every fight that these guys go into is high pressure to some degree. You're fighting in front of tens of thousands of people in a stadium or a small arena, but also hundreds of thousands, if not millions, on TV. So there's high pressure. There's pressure in that. But what Chris Eubank Jr. means is he's never been in a high pressure fight, a high stakes fight before, where there's a title on the line, or it's a grudge match, or you're in against a guy who is supposed to beat you. Conor Benn hasn't been in that situation, and that's, you know, that is where it is. It's true. He hasn't been in a situation like this where he's gone in as the underdog. But there's a first for everything, and I think that's the kind of mindset that Conor Benn has going into this, where he understands that he hasn't got this experience of doing this before, but he's embracing it and he's doing just that. He's going in for the first time into this situation and seeing whether he sinks or swims. So yeah, it's you can kind of look into the attitude of both guys, but it's nothing really new, I don't think. Conor Benn, unbeaten, got a lot of momentum right now, and thinks that he's going to go in there and do a job on Chris Eubank Jr. Chris Eubank Jr. taking the stance that he typically does and looks down on his opponent and tries to belittle them and big himself up in the process. And yeah, it's just more of that. So check it out if you've got a spare 20 minutes. Somewhat entertaining, I suppose. Ade, I think he did a good job of getting responses out of these guys. So shout out to Ade. He does some good work. I just want to say this is a bit of a tangent, and look, some of you may just be wondering, oh, why the hell are you even commenting on this? But the way the program itself is edited, for my liking, I'm not too keen on it. There were a lot of jump cuts. It wasn't like one take. And I understand in the other formats, like the Gloves Are Off, for example, you know, sometimes it'd be all three people on the table. They'd all be in shot, and then it'd be one of the guys, another one of the guys. So that was cut. It wasn't like one continuous shot. But with this one, you can see that there are some of the interactions have been edited and they don't flow naturally. And you can see where there's a cut in, and potentially someone said something that's been cut. So yeah, I wasn't too keen on that. I found it a bit too jumpy. The cinematography itself wasn't bad in terms of the camera angles and whatnot. And strangely, they didn't actually censor this. I don't know if they're going to censor it down the line, but usually things like this, the swearing gets censored, especially on YouTube, where the algorithms are so sensitive. So yeah, interesting, but these are small things. But I just found that kind of took me out of it a little bit when there are jump cuts and the dialogue, you can see it's edited and it doesn't smooth. It's not flowing smoothly. But yeah, I'm just nitpicking right now. Have you seen this? What did you think? Also, what do you think of this fight? It's fast approaching, just under a month. So I don't know how much discussion there is going to be around this fight. It seems fairly unanimous that people are expecting Chris Eubank Jr. to win. And I think that's definitely the smart money. But leave it down below, nevertheless, and I'll get back to you. But in the meantime, thanks for watching. And as always, I'll catch you in the next video.